Erma Andre Madry Hayman was born in Nampa in 1907. She was 12th in the line of 13 children born to Charles and Amanda Andre. Now, let's be honest. Other than being an extra and much-needed hand on the dairy farm and the family band, both of which the Andres had, she played piano. If you're 12 out of 13 kids, well, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot you could probably do to distinguish yourself. And Mrs. Hayman didn't really do a whole lot, really, other than living her life exceptionally in its everyday moments. Widowed with 3 kids at the age of 27, Mrs. Hayman faced discrimination with where she worked and where she lived in Boise. She remarried in 1943, and together, 5 years later, those two bought a house just north of the Boise River, 617 Ash Street, although it wasn't their first choice. But that house is now one of the few left standing to remind us of the neighborhood that once stood there. And the city hopes you will take the time to learn about it. Was there a fence around it when you were?
No.
For Dick Madry,
there was a hedge.
The days of running around Boise's River District are still pretty distinct.
Yeah, it brings back a lot of memories, basically, because I grew up here.
He grew up in this stone house on Ash Street, a grandson of Erma Hayman.
There's fence, which is probably pretty close to the end of that concrete there.
This picture was taken when he was about 8 or 9, when this part of town was considered undesirable, except by those who lived here.
In the days as I was growing up, all the streets had houses on both sides of the street. And there were a lot of people down here, of every ethnicity. The Thomases next door, I don't think they ever had a key to their house. They never ever locked the door.
In the early days of Boise, the area near the river was still pretty rural. In the middle of that rose up the River District neighborhood, including the Hayman House, standing since 1907. From the beginning, and for decades to follow, this neighborhood was literally the other side of the tracks, with a spur of the Oregon Short Line still running downtown along Front Street. And back then, less desirable meant more diverse.
It was a working class neighborhood. It was a place where the majority of Boise's black residents lived, and also many immigrants. So from all over the world, from the Basque Country and Russia and Croatia and Japan and Greece.
The reason became evident by the 1940s.
Redlined is the term. There was housing discrimination that made it so a lot of black people and a lot of immigrants were unable to purchase property in any other neighborhood.
Which is how Erma Hayman ended up here, after being declined for a house on the Boise bench.
Yeah, this was a bedroom, and across here, there were closets.
Mrs. Hayman and her second husband, Lawrence, bought this one-bedroom house in 1948. A 3-generation home that, despite its sandstone construction, at times seemed to be bursting at the seams.
6 or 7.
6 or 7?
Yeah.
In a 900-square-foot home?
Yeah.
Which is why nearly every room served as a bedroom.
There were times that this was also used as a bedroom, and of course this was a bedroom. I slept on the porch.
And the kitchen, where you can still see memories of Mrs. Hayman, like her heart-shaped rug, served up more than just food.
She would sit right there at that table for a good share of the day and, read the paper and drink coffee. And, if somebody came in to visit, that's usually where they would sit, at that table. And, whenever I would come down, she'd usually be sitting at that table.
Erma Hayman lived here until 2009. Almost up until the day she died at the age of 102.
She's not famous. She is being celebrated because she lived her everyday life in an exceptional way.
Sold to the city about 4 years ago, the Hayman House has been refurbished by Boise's Department of Arts and History as a highlight of what once was.
This is the last single-family home still standing on River Street. Even people who maybe were born in Boise and grew up here might not be aware that this was at one point a neighborhood. And now, there's so much development happening. The neighborhood, part of this neighborhood, is disappearing.
From the original floors and light fixtures, the city hopes to keep this history alive.
The story of this house is a lens through which we can look at the story of the neighborhood.
I want them to know that this was a thriving family community down here. and it really was.
And Dick believes his grandmother would be as proud of this project as she was of her own backyard.
Yeah, she would be very glad that the house is still here.
You know, I asked her grandson, who lived in that house till, well, right before he got married in 1968. I asked him if Erma Hayman was considered the matriarch of the River District. He told me, no, she didn't consider herself that. She just considered herself one of the good citizens of the neighborhood. However, she was known to never turn away any of her neighbors in need, and it was because of her there was a stoplight and a crosswalk put in at 13th and River Streets. Urban renewal in the 1970s completely changed the neighborhood into the industrial and busy intersections we see today. In order to help share Erma Hayman's story and the story of the almost gone neighborhood, the city is going to open the 115-year-old Hayman House to the public this Thursday, September 22nd. There's going to be a formal dedication at noon, and the house will be open until 6 p.m.